Out of the 40,000 guys who served on German U-boats in World War II, get this, over 30,000 never came home. Think about that for a second. That's a 3 out of 4 chance you're not walking away. These metal coffins sank more than 2,700 Allied ships, wrecked shipping lanes, killed thousands of sailors, and basically turned the entire Atlantic Ocean into their own personal shooting gallery. This is the story behind the U-boat, not just Germany's deadliest weapon under the waves, but easily one of the most terrifying, nightmare assignments any soldier could ever be handed. Let's rewind and see where this all started. Germany's road to undersea warfare. It was a total mess of trial and error. Back in 1850, this inventor named Wilhelm Bauer drew up blueprints for their first crack at a submarine. The design was ambitious, sure, but it was light years from anything we'd recognize today. They built it, they tested it, and it sank like a stone, immediately. Somehow, Bauer and his two-man crew managed to bail out and survive. But let's just say interest in the project cooled off for a while. It wasn't until the early 1900s that Germany started to get serious. They were looking for any way to throw a punch at Britain's massive navy. They couldn't match the Royal Navy's battleship fleet head-on, so they cooked up a different, nastier plan. Instead of a fair fight, they'd go after the supply lines, the commercial shipping that kept Britain alive. The logic was brutal. If you can't outgun M, starve M out. By the time World War I kicked off, Germany had 28 U-boats ready to roll, and they wasted zero time showing what they could do. Just weeks into the war, a single sub, U-9 torpedoed and sank 3 British cruisers in under an hour. More than 1,400 sailors were killed just like that. That one move was a wake-up call. The rules of naval warfare had just been ripped up and thrown overboard. But here's the thing. These early submarines weren't really subs like we think of them. They spent most of their time cruising on the surface like regular ships. They'd only dive to sneak up for an attack or to hide. Diesel engines ran on the surface and charged up big batteries. Underwater, they switched to quiet electric motors, but the juice didn't last long. They were slow, they ran out of air fast, and they had to pop back up constantly, which was when they were totally exposed and vulnerable. At first, the Germans tried to play by some old-fashioned prize rules. They'd stop a merchant ship, let the crew bail out into lifeboats, and then sink the vessel. But that whole honor system went out the window when the Brits introduced Q-ships, tricked-out merchant vessels packing hidden guns. A few U-boats got completely wrecked by these traps, and the German commanders were like, "Yeah, no, we're done playing nice." What followed was unrestricted submarine warfare. Translation: any ship, military or civilian, was now a free-fire zone. No warning. The most infamous example was the RMS Lusitania. In May 1915, U-20 put a torpedo into it off the coast of Ireland. Nearly 1,200 people died, including 128 Americans. The global outrage was off the charts, and it was a huge factor in dragging the United States into the war, which, in a massive twist of irony, is exactly what helped sink Germany in the end. By the time World War I wrapped up, U-boats had sent over 5,000 ships to the bottom, but the cost was insane. Nearly 5,000 German submariners were dead, and 178 U-boats were lost. And get this, that was just the warm-up act. The next war would take U-boat warfare to a whole new level of dark and deadly. After World War I, Germany wasn't supposed to have submarines, period. The Treaty of Versailles spelled that out, along with banning a laundry list of other weapons. But that didn't stop them, not even close. German naval planners got creative fast. They opened up submarine design offices in neutral countries and started building boats for foreign navies. On paper, they weren't building U-boats for themselves. Behind the scenes, They were perfecting every single detail for the next generation. By 1935, the jig was up. Hitler formally trashed the Versailles restrictions and announced Germany was rearming. Leading the charge for the U-boat comeback was Admiral Dönitz, and he had a brand new, terrifying strategy. Instead of sending subs out alone like lone wolves, he imagined packs of them hunting together, coordinating attacks to swamp Allied convoys. This new tactic was called the Wolfpack. And once it hit the water, Allied shipping would never sleep easy again. Germany's main weapon in this campaign was the Type WWII U-boat. This thing was the workhorse, the backbone of the fleet. About 220 feet long, it could cruise nearly 9,000 nautical miles without a pit stop. In theory, it could dive to 750 feet, but that was a break glass in case of emergency move. Most of the time, they hung out between 300 and 500 feet. Even at those depths, the hull would groan and creak under the pressure. Leaks, they were just part of the job description. The mission for these U-boats sounded simple. Sink every single ship carrying fuel, food, weapons, or troops headed for Britain. Cut the supply lines, choke the economy, bring the country to its knees. No invasion necessary. Dozens of these boats slipped into the Atlantic, shadowing the slow, predictable convoys. One sunken freighter could mean thousands of tons of cargo gone. If it was packed with soldiers, even better, they didn't waste any time. On the very first day of the war, U-30 lit up the SS Athenia, a civilian ocean liner. Over 100 passengers were killed. The German High Command later claimed it was an accident, but the message was already sent loud and clear. Civilians were on the menu too. Nobody crossing the Atlantic was safe. At first, the Royal Navy didn't fully get how bad this threat was. They figured the old convoy system, plus some sonar and depth charges, would be enough. They dealt with this in the last war right. Wrong. This time, German submarines were faster, smarter, and way more aggressive. By the end of 1939, the ocean floor was already littered with merchant wrecks. Every trip out became a brutal gamble. Crews knew that even if their ship wasn't carrying VIP cargo, it could still get painted with a target. And Admiral Dönitz was just getting warmed up. During the day, U-boats would lurk deep under the major shipping routes. Once a convoy was spotted, they'd tail it from a distance, using just periscopes and slide rules to figure out its course and speed. At night, they'd move in for the kill. U-boats also packed a deck gun, useful for finishing off a wounded ship or taking out smaller targets without wasting precious torpedoes. But as Allied planes started patrolling the skies more, surfacing became a seriously dangerous game. So most of the real damage came from torpedoes. Once the firing solution was calculated, all by hand, no fancy computers, the torpedo officer would set the angle, spread, and distance. Ready. A blast of compressed air would shoot the torpedo out of its tube. They had two main types, the G7A, powered by steam. It was fast but left a huge, obvious bubble trail pointing right back at you. Then there was the G7E electric, slower but totally silent and wake-free, perfect for a sneak attack. The catch: the early electric models were notoriously buggy. They could even do a U-turn and circle back to hit the U-boat that fired it. Talk about a backfire. A single U-boat usually carried up to 14 torpedoes, but you could only load 4 to 6 at a time. So every shot had to count. If you fired a spread and missed, you just blown your cover and invited a world of hurt from the escorts. When an attack did connect, the results were pure horror. We're talking the middle of the ocean. No nearby ports, no quick rescues. Survivors often floated for days on rafts or in freezing water, praying another ship might spot them before they died of exposure or thirst. By 1941, the U-boat threat had gone from a serious problem to a full-blown, code-red crisis. Germany's submarines were gutting the Allied supply lines. In that 1 year alone, over 6 million tons of shipping was sent to the bottom. Britain's survival literally depended on protecting those convoys. The ultimate cat-and-mouse game was on. Britain had brought back the convoy system, grouping merchant ships into heavily guarded packs. Admiral Dönitz's answer was the Wolfpack. U-boats would now operate in coordinated groups, hitting the same convoy from all sides, trying to overwhelm the escorts with sheer numbers. And so the arms race escalated. When the Germans started running in packs, the Allies created dedicated hunter-killer groups to track them down. By early 1943, all these countermeasures started to bite back hard. The Atlantic had become a death trap for U-boats. That May went down in German naval history as Black May. In just 4 weeks, they lost 43 U-boats. That's a loss rate of 41%. And with each U-boat carrying about 50 guys who went down with it, you don't even want to picture their final moments. Anti-submarine warfare had finally caught up. But it was a long, bloody learning curve. At the start of the war, the main weapon was the depth charge, a big, drum-shaped bomb you'd roll off the back of a ship, set to blow at a certain depth. The early ones were clunky and wildly inaccurate. Later, they got smarter weapons like the Hedgehog. This was a forward-firing mortar that launched 24 small contact charges ahead of the ship. Unlike depth charges, these only exploded if they actually hit the sub. It meant ships could attack with more precision and without giving the U-boat an early warning from the splash. When a depth charge went off close by, the pressure wave could crumple the hull like a soda can, bust internal gear, or force the boat to the surface where it was a sitting duck. A direct hit. It would crush the sub completely, and it wasn't just surface ships turning the tide. Aircraft became a game changer. Long-range patrol bombers, kitted out with radar, spotlights, and their own depth charges, could scour huge areas of ocean. They de-catch U-boats on the surface, charging batteries, before they could even think about diving. By 1943, there was no safe corner of the Atlantic left. If a U-boat surfaced, it risked getting spotted from the air. If it stayed submerged, it faced sonar and ever more accurate attacks from ships. Germany's once unstoppable undersea fleet was getting backed into a corner. The hunters had officially become the hunted. But here's the real kicker. What made life on a U-boat a total nightmare wasn't just the danger outside the hull. It was the sheer, grinding hell of life inside. Life on a U-boat was, to put it bluntly, absolutely brutal. Patrols could drag on for up to 12 weeks, and as the mission wore on, conditions went from bad to worse to unlivable. Air quality was enemy number one. Early U-boats didn't have great air scrubbers. Within a day of diving, the air turned stale and thick. Oxygen levels dropped. Headaches were constant. Staying down too long could literally suffocate you. You had about 50 guys crammed into less than 1,800 cubic feet of living space. There weren't enough bunks, so the crew hot bunked. You crawled into a bunk still warm from the last guy, slept your shift, and got out for the next guy. Only the captain had anything like privacy, and his quarters were basically a glorified closet. Fresh food, gone within a couple of weeks. After that, it was hardtack biscuits, canned mystery meat, and whatever hadn't gone rancid in the damp, hot air. Water was rationed to about 2 gallons per man per day for everything, drinking, cooking, the works. In reality, showers weren't happening. The combo of heat, sweat, and zero hygiene led to skin infections so common they had a name: U-boat rot. Sailors got rashes, open sores, you name it. There was an old joke among Allied sailors that you could smell a U-boat before you ever saw it, and that was on a good day. What really messed with guys' heads was the constant, gnawing knowledge that death could be waiting around any corner, in ways too awful to think about. It's one thing to be afraid of getting shot. It's a whole other level of terror to be trapped in a thin metal tube, miles from help, sinking into the freezing, pitch-black deep. Whether from battle damage, a mechanical screw-up, or a botched dive, the result was the same: a rapid, uncontrolled plunge toward what they called crush depth. The hull would scream in protest, steel groaning and bending. Everyone on board knew exactly what was coming next. Water pressure gets insane fast. Go too deep and the hull just gives up. It's an implosion. The entire boat gets flattened in a split second. The only way out was to blow the ballast tanks with high-pressure air and pray you could level off. But if that system was busted, or the dive was too far gone, you were just along for the ride to the end. And believe it or not, there was something even scarier than a quick implosion. Sometimes a sub wouldn't go deep enough to crush. It would just hit the ocean floor in shallower water. Then you were stuck. The crew would be sitting in the dark, power gone, with no way out. In some cases, they'd just slowly run out of air. In others, freezing seawater would start trickling in, rising inch by agonizing inch. That was the real mind melter. Not getting blown apart, but being buried alive in a steel coffin at the bottom of the sea, with nothing to do but wait for the end. Then there were fires. Inside a U-boat, you're surrounded by diesel fuel, volatile batteries, and high-explosive torpedoes. If a fire broke out, putting it out was a nightmare. Compartments were sealed with heavy pressure doors to stop flooding or flames from spreading. But those doors worked both ways. If a fire erupted in one section and the doors got shut, anyone left on the wrong side was toast. These were the kinds of brutal, split-second choices commanders had to make, and the crews lived with that reality every single day. If the batteries got damaged or malfunctioned, they could spew out toxic chlorine gas, which could turn the air lethal in minutes. All of this, is the big reason why 3 out of every 4 guys who served on U-boats didn't make it out of the war alive. They went out in some of the most terrifying ways you can possibly imagine.